which is now going to be bigger than Colombo. So this looks like they seem to have a lot of leverage in our backyard.
Well, I mean, first of all, if you just focusing on those particular ports in Sri Lanka and in Pakistan, Pakistan and Sri Lanka haven't agreed to the militarization of those ports, which means that they haven't actually agreed to China using those ports.
For a naval base. But that's what the defense minister of Pakistan told them. Invited them to build a naval base.
So invited them to build a port, but...
No, naval base.
A naval base, but I can guarantee, well, I will stake my reputation that you will have Chinese ships visiting on port visits, but you won't actually have Chinese ships, actually using the port in any meaningful way. But I do accept that there are certain countries, namely Pakistan, Sri Lanka, I think, is just trying to get as much out of China as they can. I don't think they actually intend to give China anything back in return, but we'll see how that plays out. But I have to admit that Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Cambodia is now a country that is quite acceptable.
North Korea.
Well, North Korea and Myanmar, of course, are the two allies that China has. But
that's about 500 million people.
Well, arguably, that's more of a strategic liability than an asset, those two countries. But I will admit that Pakistan and let's say Cambodia and Sri Lanka, yes, they have moved closer to China, but the major powers in East and Southeast Asia, who all have excellent trading and diplomatic relations with China, are all moving closer to the Americans in a very explicit way to hedge against China. This is an indication to me that even as trade deepens, these countries are actually hedging even stronger against China. So I think this is actually a problem for Beijing. And I was at the Shanghai Dialogue 2 weeks ago in Singapore, which is the meeting of defence ministers, and the Chinese Minister of Defence, General Liang, was there. And even General Liang spoke about what he called the Cold War, that we should end the Cold War mentality of alliances. What General Liang was effectively saying was that there are all these alliances that are deepening against China, and let's be clear about it, they are a hedge against China. And this is occurring despite China's economic importance. So I suppose my argument is that that's the lack of leverage argument.
Okay, well, it's going to take a long time, I think, for this vulnerability to really play out because, and I know that Chinese people believe in a really long duration, 5-year plans. I think Chairman Mao was once asked, so what do you think about the French Revolution? And he said, it's too early to tell. So, they take a very long... But, I take your point that the CCP, that's Chinese Communist Party, before the CCP, there was the CCCP. And you know what happened to that. Perhaps, we can look out for what you say as vulnerability. But I don't want to now hog everything, so we should open up to Q&A. So please, request to you is please identify yourself and please be brief and pointed. We have a roaming mic. And remember, this is the vice captain of the flight, so I will do some traffic management. I'm sure my captain will not mind.
I agree with Mr. Lee on the economic leverage is not really proportionate to the clout in terms of international relations, and I think he's raised a very pertinent point in the East Asia, where the fight is already brewing on the South China Sea. So, and we see what Vietnam is basically sort of, so that's one. And the rare earths, when the Chinese decided to sort of stop the export, the other started basically going back to their own sources, especially in the US, and they started basically giving the mining license back. So I think to an extent, I think there is a basis of truth in, economic clout need not necessarily mean that you will have international clout to basically significantly change policy decisions in the international institutions.
Okay. I think there's Machiavelli, who said, see, people in India, we think that the West and the rest of the world takes China much more seriously than India. Sorry if I'm in a minority view, but that's the impression we have, that when it comes to China, there's fear and awe, and there's wonder and anxiety and nervousness. So there's, the West seems to take China seriously. So maybe it's, if you want to control the world, quote unquote, it's better to inspire fear and awe rather than love and friendship, so that just doesn't work. So isn't that true that China
Well, look, I do think China inspires awe, and one of the reasons is that China is not as transparent a society and its decision-making processes are more opaque than other countries. So that in itself inspires a little bit of fear and mystery.
Yeah.
But, you know, I suppose part of what I'm trying to do with my research is to say, let's look at the facts, let's look at what China can and cannot do and act accordingly. I mean, I don't like to overplay the China threat argument. Even though I'm critical of some policies of the Chinese Communist Party, I'm also saying that we shouldn't overplay the threat of China.
Sure.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Kersi. I would like to know the things which is not discussed today. That is, many economists have claimed that India and China will contribute 50% of the gross domestic product of the world. I would like to know from you, out of 50% gross domestic product of combined India and China, what will be China's share? And naturally, I will come to know that is from what will be India's share also.
Okay. All right.
I expect both of you to reply.
I'm not quite sure they will contribute 50% of GDP. I mean, currently, if we look at projections, currently, I think America is about 21, 22%. China is perhaps 10%, 9%, something like that. India, I'm not sure, maybe
1, 2%.
so whatever the case may be. I think it's a long while away until.
So out of 50%, how much China?
No. What he's saying is, it's going to take a long time. They say in 1750 or 1650, the share of world GDP was much more in this part of the world. And some people project that in about next 50 or 75 years, it's going to come back and the share of China and India will rise. Right now, he's saying it's about 9 plus 2, 11%. That 11% will slowly rise. But like I said, you know, the Chinese and so also Indians, we take a very long view.
Yeah.
So, yeah, any question? Yeah, at the back. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Li Miao. I'm from CCTV. I'm the journalist covering the South India. And actually, I want to thank you, Mr. Lanada. You're defending my country, right? Thank you very much. And I just discussed with the gentleman sitting beside me. Does your Mr. Li, your last name, you have some Chinese blood with you? Because my last name is also Li, so I just curious about
What's
this.
your question, Ms. Lee?
Yeah, my question actually is now about China. The rising economy problem is quite popular in between the economists or some of the organization, even like you, scholars, some of these people. You know, during you are doing this research or some kind of maybe some forum, you are all talking about Chinese giving very fast, economist growth. But why every country, you think now, like you said, they are a little bit concerned about Chinese growing so fast? We are kind of all of the biggest partnership with different countries. As the business or the trade partner, you're supposed to wish we are getting better because you are benefit from we are growing.
What's your
But
question?
why? I just don't know why you're saying Chinese growing fast and threaten you.
Why is Chinese growth a threat to the world?
I think it's.
I don't think he said that, but
Yeah, I don't think I actually said it's a threat to the world. In fact, my point was that Chinese growth doesn't threaten the world. But I think China, and it goes back to a previous comment, China creates fear because of the intransparent nature of decision making in China. You know, Lee Kuan Yew, the Singapore minister or mentor, former prime minister, he said, very few countries in the region fear India's rise. Now, I know South Asia, that may not necessarily be true, but certainly in East Asia and Southeast Asia, that's true. Whereas countries fear China's rise. And I think it's because, whether this is correct or not, I think it's that other countries feel confident how India makes decisions and therefore what kind of rising power India will be. I think there is a level of inscrutability about what kind of rising power China will be. The second reason is simply, and this is not unique to China, it's just that China is a large country, is that China has ongoing maritime and land disputes with other countries in Asia. That's a very simple matter. And if China continues to rise, then clearly it will have a very formidable capability of trying to do that. And we're seeing what's happening in the South China Sea right now. So for those two reasons, I think there's a fear of China's rise.
Okay. At the back, yeah.
Hi, Mr. Lee. My name is Pushpa Vijula, Mr. Ranade. It was lovely hearing both of you. Thank you, Mr. Kulkarni, for arranging this. Mr. Lee, I'm Pushpa Vijula. I'm a freelance journalist. I appreciate your point about the Chinese leaders being very honest. Wanted to ask you to expand a little bit on the point that China's economy is growing very fast now, and India is not that much of a competition. Is it related to TRIPS and TRIMS agreement? Because India has allowed any foreign country to come and put 100 rupees and take back 99 rupees. And China says, if you want to take back $100, you first put it in our country, generate the money,
Pushpa.
and then take the money back.
Okay, so the question
is that the crux of the reason of India not being taken so seriously and China doing so well economically?
Okay, all right. So this, we keep coming back to this, when you said that Lee Kuan Yew quote, you said, when India is rising, nobody's afraid of India. Many people in India don't like that. They don't take it as a compliment. But anyway, so why is it that, why did Lee Kuan Yew say this about India and China?
I mean, besides the two reasons that I gave in the previous question, there's a third reason, and that is in India, there is less resources as a proportion of national wealth in the hands of the state. In China, there is a lot more resources in the hands of the state. Now, state-owned enterprises are not exactly the same thing as the Chinese Communist Party. I accept that they're not they're not identical.
Right.
But I think there's still this fear that they can potentially be used for national interest reasons. But India is essentially a private sector-driven economy in terms of the growth is coming from the private sector. In China, it's coming from the state sector, and I think state sectors create more distrust than private sectors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi John, I'm Prasanna from Rediff.com. I'm a reporter. What should India worry more about? China's growing economic might or military might? Considering that India and China compete with each other in Asia as well as Africa to own oil assets and mineral assets.
So this is John, this is a India question now. So you have to wear a different hat. He's a China specialist. So he wants to know what should India be worried about with respect to China. Because there's talk that while India and China are competitors about world's oil resources and perhaps position in the Security Council,
yeah.
But there are others who, by the way, feel that India and China should cooperate in the field of energy, water resources, environment, and so on. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at, for example, the drive to invest in Africa for resources and things like that by India and China. China, it's state-owned enterprises from China that are investing in Africa, whereas India, it's largely private companies. There are some SOEs, but it's mainly private companies. That makes the relationship of trust and cooperation difficult because Chinese state-owned enterprises will always have deeper pockets than private sector companies, so they will also be increasingly outbid by Chinese companies. But I think your question, what does India have to fear? I don't see anything sinister behind what China's doing in Africa. It's more that because they're SOEs, they have very deep pockets. They're given beneficial loans and things like that by the Chinese government, and it's more a commercial competition rather than anything sinister that India should be worried about.
Thank you, John. So one last question. Yeah. Person.
As the economy gets more complex, you need a high level of trust and flexibility. What are the chances that as China goes up and the trust and flexibility does not match what is required, that you could have a sort of a mini implosion like Russia, or you think that they'd find a way out?
You mean trust and flexibility within the Chinese system itself? Yeah, I mean, the big worry I have with China, and you know, I don't necessarily advocate democracy for China, anything like that, but the one thing that I do worry about China is that it hasn't built adequate soft institutions and hard institutions. It hasn't built adequate property rights. I know it's a problem in India too, but it hasn't built adequate rule of law, adequate independent bureaucracies, administrative systems, ways of resolving disputes. That's what I'm concerned about. And if China continues to lag behind in those areas, then I think that will simply stymie its capacity to rise as a modern, complex economy, as your question implies.
Okay, great. So we are now on clearly coasting. We are going to land shortly. And just before we close, do you want to have a closing quick one sentence, two sentences? Okay, so I just want to put one fact before with the audience because I think it's important. You know, in the 12th five-year plan, you know, there's he mentioned lots of targets, but he expressed concern about implementation. But I'm quite, this is a remarkable target. The 12th five-year plan for China is 2011 to 2015, and they have two targets: to reduce the carbon dioxide emission per unit of GDP by 17% and to reduce energy consumption per unit of GDP by 16%. So I think it's a pretty impressive and very sort of tangible target. So I think my takeaway is that, you know, China is growing fantastically. It's large. It is its economic footprint is very large. But we don't need to be really afraid of it because they're just like us. I mean, just bigger.
They're muddling through.
Yeah, they're muddling through. Yeah. So thank you very much. Please thank the captain for a wonderful flight.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite Mr. Kulkarni to make his closing remarks.
And I can assure you that there will be some turbulence. Friends, on behalf of the Observer Research Foundation, I want to thank Dr. Lee and our co-host Ish Society, and also the Australian Consulate for giving us the opportunity of hosting it here. We did get to hear a different perspective on China. But permit me, Dr. Lee, to disagree with you on several points. You know, India and China are neighbors. We want to establish peaceful, good neighborly relations with China. Relations that are in consonance with our age-old civilizational ties. Because of history, especially recent history, colonial history, we've had some problems. Those problems persist. But we are confident that India and China are mature enough to overcome these problems. What is required is sustained dialogue based on mutual trust, better understanding at all levels, both political as well as people-to-people level. But in doing so, we very often get to hear perspectives from outside as to why we should fear China. Why China's rise is a threat to India, threat to others, threat to the world. I mean, I'm not saying that everything that China does or has done is something that is to be supported. Does China have problems? Of course it has problems. China's growth model, while it has fantastic achievements, there are problems in the form of rich-poor divide, urban-rural divide, problems of corruption, environmental degradation, and of course there are people's protests. But which country in the world does not have problems? I mean, are we claiming that the United States has no problems because it's a democracy? All these scenarios that China is going to collapse, will China fail? What do we mean, will China fail? I mean, China has succeeded. Let us give credit where it is due. That China is a country which has succeeded in lifting more than 100 million people out of abject poverty within a single generation. Is it not something to be given credit for? In the process, of course, it has encountered problems. Let's give the Chinese people, the Chinese leaders, I mean, they will find their own answers. Those who think that China should have the same kind of democracy as the Western powers, they should have the same kind of governance system as elsewhere. I mean, world is too plural, diverse to follow one particular system. And in saying that China's growth model is not sustainable, I would have liked to hear from our speaker how sustainable is the growth model of America. I mean, America is a country whose entire growth is dependent on borrowings. Domestic borrowings, foreign borrowings. The rest of the world puts its foreign exchange resources in dollar reserves, and using that money, how is it projecting its power rest of the world? I mean, there is not a single year since the end of Second World War when the United States has not been at war with some country or the other around the world. And to say that all the countries now, because China is rising, they want to have an alliance with America. I mean, is this what we want? We don't want either alliance against China, alliance against America. All the Cold War scenarios and divisions that have inflicted so much harm on humanity. We need to really change the way world has been governed. I think that the world is getting more democratized. A large country like China, a large country like India are rising. They are asserting themselves. And countries, which are really tiny compared to India, China, but which were projecting power and which were the cause of so many wars, which were the cause of a completely undemocratic economic and political order. Of course, they have much to fear because of the rise of China, the rise of India. In saying this, friends, I also have to say that we in India have to tell ourselves, and we would like to tell our friends from China, that as we grow economically stronger, we must not follow the example set by global powers in the 20th century. We must not do anything that creates apprehensions, fear amongst our neighbors or countries at large. We have a responsibility, India and China especially, but also other countries, have a responsibility to create a completely different global order where everybody can live, grow in peace. Where small countries, big countries, mid-sized countries, we need a different paradigm of development. And that is the responsibility of China, that's the responsibility of India too. Lastly, friends, I must disclose a certain secret. The earlier title of this talk was, Will China Fail? I mean, we at the Observer Research Foundation disagreed with that title, because we don't, do we want China or some think tank in China discussing will India disintegrate? I mean, is that the kind of discussion that we should have? Of course, we should be frank enough and also open enough in knowing about what is going wrong in China. And we would like China to become more open, more transparent. And I'm sure that China will become a more democratic, a freer country in the years to come. Nobody can stop the tide of freedom, of democracy. It's bound to happen. But then, as I said earlier, it is not just one particular kind of democracy that every country in the world should emulate. Probably Communist Party of China might transform itself into a Confucius Party of China, a Confucian kind of democracy. Let's give them the right to transform their society the way they want, so long as they also are sensitive to the concerns of their neighbors, so long as they are committed to resolving all issues peacefully. We should not fear China at all. We at the Observer Research Foundation have a very particular, as I said, we do have, India and China do have certain disputes. We are not glossing over those disputes, but we believe that we must find a mature, peaceful way of engaging China, resolving disputes, building closer, stronger, more expansive bonds of friendship. Thank you very much.
But can you send me an email?
Yeah, you should just fill this out and come back to the office.